Cool. Okay, so I'm just going to keep going with the demonstration I did on Tuesday. So on Tuesday we did the first couple of news stories in part one, and I'm going to do part two. And again, the point of the demonstration is so you can see just one way to implement these stories. It's not necessarily the only way, but this is one way that hopefully will demonstrate a methodical process. So as I go through it, take notes to pick out things that you think are interesting, and we can talk about them at the end after I finish. if you see anything horrendous, just like shout it out. Just be like, Ed, what are you doing? It's always fun. Okay, so I'm going to where am I? Cool. Opening up my directory. Okay, so this is what we came up with last session, where we have a README, where we had the first part. We went through looking at nouns and verbs, extracting from the user stories nouns and verbs, and then formed a table, timetable with objects and messages. I'm just going to have that on the right hand side. Why do you always fail the first time you do it? Cool. So this is where I'm at. I'm going to grab the next two and just plonk them right here. So I'm just going to continue. Essentially go through the same process. I'm just reformatting this so it looks a little better. Part one, part two. On the right hand side. Now, if you need me to make it bigger, just to give me a shout. Nouns and verbs. Let's make this actually a table. I think GitHub Markdown can do something like that. Yes, it can do that. Although that doesn't really make sense because we're just meant to be doing lists of nouns and verbs, weren't we? Let's actually just keep it as it was, right? Docking station. So I'm doing a little bit of cleanup before I begin the next part because style is important to me. Nouns, verbs. Okay, so we did our list of nouns and verbs, and then we created our table, objects and messages, and let's put in. Cool, all right. That looks a little bit better on the right-hand side. So if I look at part two, and I have a look at, as a member of the public, so that I'm not confused and charged unnecessarily, I like docking stations not to release bikes when there are none available. I don't see any new nouns or verbs in this part. We're still using the docking station as our noun, release as our verb, bike as our noun. But there's like a condition, it's like a scenario here, which is interesting to me. So I still have the same objects and messages, but this time I think what I'm going to do is to sort of like update my model of things. Is I'm going to I'm going to create what I call, let's call this like I don't know what a good name for this is. I usually call this like an extended input-output table. So let's go with that. And what I want to do is think about, for my release method, I'd like docking stations not to release bikes. So my release method can do two things. It can release a bike, or it can somehow not release a bike when there are none available. So I want to think about those two different sort of outputs. So I want to sort of like give some structure to how I'm thinking. So I'm going to try and figure out a way to do another box or a table like this where I can have like different outputs. So let's say this is, I might call it something else. Let's call it method for the moment, where I'm going to just focus on my my release method. Let's just get rid of all this for a moment. In this scenario, I guess I have two scenarios. So I'm just building up down here. So the notation on the right-hand side that you see here is the object, and then the method that I'm writing for it. You'll see the hashtag as a way to denote an instance method. So this docking station class has an instance method called release. I'm going to have two scenarios. One was my original one, which is when there are bikes. When there are bikes. And this scenario is when there are none. So these are two different scenarios that I want to sort of think about. My input, cool. I'm sure you can see down there. Can everyone see the sort of formatted table on the right-hand side? Some nods, cool. Thanks. I'm still just calling my release methods. I'm just going to have it like that. And then my output is the one that changes. When there are bikes, we know that it's just going to be a bike. That's what we want. Let's add another. Okay, cool. And when there are none, now I have to think about what do I want to happen when there are no bikes. And when I try and call this release method, it tells me that I shouldn't release a bike. So rather than releasing from an array, maybe what I want to do is return a string that just says, sorry, none available. Maybe that's what I want to do. There might be a few different ways to do this, but let's just go ahead and have a look at doing that. So when I call my release method, I have two possibilities. One will return a bike if we do a bike, and one will just return a string saying, sorry, not available, which there are none. So those are the two different ways, two different sort of code paths, two different outputs, given the same input. Cool. Okay, so now I think that represents well enough this user story. This one here. I'm going to try and then think about how I can add a spec to this. So I'm just going to copy this user story and go to my spec. And I'm in the release bike. So here is the next spec that I'm going to write. So I'm just going to copy this spec. So this spec is called when there are none. Yes, it will not release a bike when there are none. Okay. And so my setup is going to involve creating a docking station. I don't need a bike because this is when there are no bikes, so I don't need to dock a bike. And then I execute some code, documentation.release, and what I want to happen, I can just go down here and say, I just want to return this string. So this is what I want to happen. It will not release a bike when there are none. Cool, I think I'm okay with that. Let's go ahead and run this test. So really spec runner. So it can dock a bike, it can release a bike, but will not release a bike when there are none. Failed. This is good because I haven't written any source code, so I should see a test failure. So I'm going to go to my docking station and going to think about what I need to do to get this to work. So I'm in my release method, it's this one here. And I need to sort of introduce a condition, right? I need to do something that says, if it's empty, if bikes is empty, return a string. Otherwise, else, pop a bike. That's what I want to happen, right? So let's write it. If I've got a reader up here, so I'll use the reader. If bikes dot length, so bikes is the method. Oh, I can hear someone at my door, my front door. They're just gonna have to wait. They'll figure it out. They'll figure it out. Sorry, I can hear someone knocking the door. If bikes, like bikes is a method, that's going to return the instance at bikes. So I expect this to be empty. They're knocking again. Hold on, I'll be right back. Cool. Sorry about that, folks. Okay, so if the length of the bikes is empty, how do we know it's empty? Well, if the length is 0, then we want to return a string. So I'm just going to copy the output. That's what I want to happen. Else, bikes. Cool. So I think that is what I need to do. So I'll run my test again. Cool. Done. Do I have a chance to refactor? So right thing, test, red, we saw it failed. I tried to do the simplest thing to get it to pass. Saw it to pass, it's now green. And now we have a small little refactor. I guess there are a couple of things I can do. This is bikes is empty, so I'm describing it. So I guess I could try and pull this out to a method. Something like this. Oh, not that one. If bikes dot length is equal to 0. That's what it was. So maybe that reads a little bit better when you're sort of scanning your eye through this method. If it's empty, sorry, not available, it kind of makes sense. I also prefer, if this is like a guard condition, I prefer to change it to be something like this. So it will return the string if it's empty. If it's not empty, it just continues. So this is like a guard condition that says stop and return this if this condition is met. I think I prefer that way of writing rather than the multi-line if statement, specifically for guard condition-like things. So I think that's enough. I'm going to run my spec runner again, double check that whenever I change or refactor, my tests will pass. Cool. So I think I'm going to move on to the next user story. I've gone through my red-green refactor cycle, so let's have a look at number 2. So part 2, or user story number 2 in part 2, as a system maintainer so that I can control the distribution of bikes with like docking stations not to accept more bikes than a capacity, which is by default 20. This is the dock method. So when you dock a bike, there are 2 different scenarios now, right? So let's describe both the scenarios. This is going to be the doc scenario. And the two different scenarios are, just as normal. We're thinking about capacity, right? So this is below capacity. And I guess when we start off with, we are going to dock the bike. Our message should be when it's below capacity, should just be the array of bikes, for example. Docking station, when the station is below capacity, which is what we want, we should be able to dock a bike and return the array of bikes. Okay, and then the condition that we want to actually write is when it's above capacity, at or above, I guess. I want to be able to then return a string, I guess. We can return a string for doing it. If it's not, we just say, yeah, sorry, not at capacity, full, sorry, full. Keep it nice and sweet. I'm not thinking too much about it. There might be different ways to sort of signify or show that it's full, but this is what I'm going to do at the moment. I'm not thinking about it too much. So those are my two different scenarios for the dock method. I try and dock a bike given different things. Now, interestingly, there's a bit of information here, which is this default 20, this capacity. So I'm going to add something to this objects and messages. I'm going to call it data. I want to sort of try and capture this important bit of information for my docking station, which is that we have like this capacity thing, and it should be 20. So that feels important. It says default 20, it's like it's written into the user story, so I'm going to try and capture it somehow. Okay. And that capacity is needed for this below, for this dock method. It should check. Okay. So, which one should I do first? Well, really, this capacity thing should be, although I don't like testing state. Let's, I think it's important, so we might be fun to demonstrate how I do this. I think this is important enough that should be captured or codified with its own test. So in my docking station spec, I'm going to write another test. It has a default capacity of 20. And what I want to do is go through my setup phase. Setup phase. And my setup phase for this is going to just be, I want to somehow store in this docking station object this value 20, refer to it. So I'm going to store it as a constant. So I'm going to do something like this. I'm going to say, I want capacity. And I want to see whether every time I create a docking station, it has this value in this capacity constant called 20. I think that's what I'm going to try and set a test to do, and then make it pass between source code. So I'm going to store the result like that. And then assert. And I want that to be 20. So let's make that pass. And before I move on to it, so my error message here says uninitialized constant capacity. So let's initialize the constant. So I'm going to go to docking station and just add in a capacity constant, and it starts off at 20. That's just the default. Cool. Now, really, I've named it the test a bit weirdly. So really, it should be it has default capacity constant, because I haven't really done anything yet. I've just said it has this value. So let me just be clear in my test. has a default capacity constant 20. So then I want to actually write a test that says I can't dock bikes when I reach capacity. So let's go ahead. I think it's all under this set, so I'll just put it here. And so I'm going to do something very similar to this one. I can dock a bike at some point and won't be able to. So it will not. At or above capacity. Okay, so what's my setup for this test? Well, docking station, I want to create a bike. Docking station, I want to do this 20 times. I'm going to create new bikes each time just so I don't have to worry about using the same bike all the time. And then I want to, it's still actually part of setup, I haven't done anything yet. And then I want to try and dock another bike. And then I want to assert that we have this message that says sorry for at that point in time. So the idea is we have a capacity of 20. So I want to be able to only dock 20 bikes. And when the app bikes reaches a length of 20, I want to say, actually, we can't push any more into it. And instead, let's keep returning the string instead saying sorry for. So my setup is I create a docking station and I use this instance to dock 20 bikes. And then I want to dock one more bike and the result should be sorry for. So that's my test. I'm going to run my tests again. Will not dock a bike when at or above capacity. Nice, it's failing. So now it's failing. I want to race to green. So let's go to my docking station. I'm in my dock bike method. So let's do the same thing. I'm going to comment to myself about what I'm trying to do. If bikes is length 20, then return my string. So sorry. Else I want to push the bike. Push a bike, pop a bike. Pike, that's not quite right. It's a very different thing. Pikes can be vicious. All right. So let's write some code. If bikes length, actually it's not just the length 20, is something that refers to the capacity. So here is where I can do something a little bit differently than I was thinking. So I want to be able to have a capacity instance variable, and I'm going to set it from my initialize method with a default, like this. So this is saying I'm going to set a default argument of 20. I can actually pass in different capacities, so I probably should write another test for that in a second. And then I can compare. So this will either be set with the default capacity or a different capacity that I can then change at will. And so when I dock a bike, I want to check the capacity. So if the length of the bike's array is greater than or equal to capacity, then return sorry for, else push the bike. Let's have a look. Cool, great, passes. Let me just double check if I have a different error message. Cool, the phone is so. Um, let me do a quick refactor now. I've got that passing. I'm going to do pretty much the same thing I did for the release method. I'm going to, this doesn't really make sense without having to spend time thinking about it, but what this represents is if it's full. So let me just write another method down here, full. And what do I do for the bikes? Is greater than or equal to capacity. Right, sorry, length. So quick check, is it still passing? Cool. And then let's reorganize it. Return a string if it's full, otherwise continue and push the bike. Cool, I'm going to get rid of these now because now they've helped me write it. I don't need them anymore. Still passing, cool. I wanted to be able to demonstrate or write a spec that I can change the capacity. So let's add that in. That is, yeah, let's do another one here. So it can be initialized with a capacity, let's just say that, with a variable capacity. So what's my setup? I want a docking station with a capacity of 1. Yay, very small docking station. And then I'm going to what's a good way of using my test framework for loading. I'm not going to think too much about it. I'm just going to do something very similar to this, and let's say capacity is 1. And use this variable, and then do capacity times Docker bike, docking station. So that only happened once, and so then when I try and dock one more bike, I should get the same message as before. The result. So this is basically just doing the same thing as not docking blank, but with a different capacity. So I've just copied the same format. The only difference is I have a different initial object with a capacity that is set at 1. So this should automatically pass because I haven't actually done anything different. So that was interesting because that's actually a demonstration of writing a test after having written some source code, just add in or cover an edge case. So if I were to go to my docking station and remove this, then my test would fail. So it helps give me some indication of what I need to do. So, cool. I'm going to, I think, pause here, double check if there's anything else I should do. Looks fine. I've passed my acceptance criteria. I like Docker stations to release, not to release bikes when they're unavailable. I like Docker stations not to accept more bikes than the capacity, which is by default 20. I think my specs make sense. Docker bike has default capacity, can be initialized with variable capacity, will not Docker bike, and capacity from this bike, and then not this bike. Cool. All right. I am going to stop there.